Welcome to the Aerpod, a podcast about aviation careers. My name's Mitchell, and today we're talking with Spencer, a helicopter pilot with experience across the industry, including utility operations, oil rig transport, and medical air ambulance. We talked about what's at stake when medical flying,
somebody out there laying in a field that isn't going to get any help until we touch skids down in the field.
how you manage risk when attempting to save a life.
As an EMS pilot, you have to make sure that your number one goal is that your crew and yourself make it back to the airport. And that's where your risk tolerance stops.
How the general public perceives helicopter operations.
Just a minor inconvenience of 30 seconds of a helicopter flying over them at 2 a.m, but what they don't see is, whatever that patient is that we're going to get them.
The risks of utility operations.
We had some flight profiles that were pretty low to the ground, so like sub 300 feet AGL. And then airspeeds that were pretty low too, like 45 knots, 35 knots.
And his advice for aspiring helicopter pilots.
90% of being a pilot is your attitude.
Here's Spencer on what got him into aviation.
Right out of high school, I went to the Army, and the goal was to fly for the military. And that kind of led me into being a firefighter paramedic, which provided an opportunity to work full time with the shifts that they work and then go to flight school at the same time. And then, then from there, Silverhawk Aviation in Idaho, flight instructor in Pennsylvania, all of this Texas flying, South Texas type flying, hog hunts and stuff from there, Gulf of Mexico, and then North Star up in Minot, Skyscopes, and Air Methods now. So
sure.
Yep.
Cool. What does Air Methods do?
Air Medical.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Sweet. So going into the military, you just saw that as a pathway to flying. Was that something you always wanted to do, or that was just the easiest route for you to get into flying?
Yeah. So flying, always wanted to since I was a little guy, run around pointing at airplanes and helicopters. But the military, I was always attracted to being in the military as well. So I thought that, was a good route to take to be able to fly and do that. Didn't end up working out. I found an easier path through the civilian side, a quicker path. But yeah, that was the intention of it.
And why did you choose the Army versus, did you always want to fly helicopters? Or?
Yeah, flying helicopters. Yeah. So that seemed like the place to go to do the helicopter stuff.
So the paramedic side, was that what you were assigned when you went into the military?
Firefighter was actually my job.
Okay.
In the military, we weren't too heavy on the medical side, but that kind of opened me up to being around other firefighter paramedics that were doing that as a real job, plus the firefighting as their reserve job at the side. And I thought that was pretty cool. I was actually an EMT. I did that in high school before all of this military stuff had happened, so I kind of knew what it was about, and just thought that would be a cool career path to get some good knowledge and some good work schedules and stuff to help out with flight school.
Did you do back of the helicopter medical stuff too?
I was a fixed wing medic for a little bit in North Dakota. That was where a lot of my paramedic practicing happened, was in North Dakota, and then moved out to Idaho to get closer to flight school there to get started.
Yeah, so with fixed wing medical transport, that's a little less, I guess, maybe urgent than the helicopter typically would be. Are you transporting patients between facilities?
Yeah, more typically between facilities. Sometimes you'll see more critical patients, just because they'll need more equipment that you won't necessarily be able to get into a helicopter. So you might see some more critical patients and more unique cases, because they might be needing to go a long ways, all the way out to Minneapolis to a specialty out there or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and obviously North Dakota is pretty sparse, so
yeah,
not exactly right around the corner as far as major hospitals go.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then as you wanted to make that transition to becoming a pilot, what was that like, moving from the backseat up to actually flying?
Yeah. So there was a pretty good gap from when I quit being a paramedic to when I was a pilot, and then not doing anything medical. There's probably 2 or 3 years. So I think it was just enough time to kind of get me out of the medical scene for a little bit, that enough stuff had changed. And I don't want to say I wasn't too interested in it anymore, but it wasn't my main focus. So it was a lot easier that when I did jump into an EMS role, with a helicopter, to kind of stand back and let the clinicians do their job, but still know enough and still understand, maybe a little bit more than what the average pilot in an EMS position would do. So a lot of my clinicians really like that, and like the appreciation that I had for their side of the job, just because I'd been there and done that before.
Mm-hmm. So with that kind of flying, do you not have to be an EMT to be a flight medical?
Yeah, no medical background at all.
Okay.
I've heard the argument both ways that it helps, and then some people say it might even hurt because you maybe know a little bit too much of what's going on with the patient, and that might persuade your decisions. But I think at the end of the day, if you're just doing regular pilot stuff, normal pilot stuff, not outside your box, it doesn't matter either way. You can be successful at it.
Right. Yeah, I talked to some law enforcement guys. I went to an air show and they had like the 182 that they use for speed enforcement. And I guess with most law enforcement agencies, you actually have to be a patrol officer before you can actually fly for them. So it's interesting that they don't require that with medevac stuff.
Yeah. When I was a flight instructor out in Pennsylvania, we had a lot of the Pennsylvania State Patrol guys come through. Because of that reason, they wanted to get into the aviation unit, but they would have to have their private helicopter license before they could even apply for the unit. So they were coming through, getting that one license done, and then the state patrol would provide the rest of their training through CFII in their aircraft. I think they're flying A-Stars.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so before we go too deep into the medical flying side, you said there's a gap there where you were flying some non-medical stuff. So what does that pathway look like? I'm pretty familiar on the fixed wing side. People want to go be a professional pilot. They want to fly for the airlines, what those stepping stones look like as far as career opportunities as you work your way up. On the helicopter side, what are the jobs available for low-time pilots?
Yeah. So just like anything, there's a couple different ways to slice it, but I would say the most common and maybe the most streamlined route of moving into some of these higher level jobs would be go to flight school, get all the way through CFII, and then that should land you around 200 hours of flight time. Usually a little bit short. Some guys usually have to go burn off a little bit of time to hit that 200 hours, but that number is a magic number for the SFAR 73 to be able to instruct in Robinson helicopters. Robinsons are definitely the most prevalent training helicopter out there. And then your next stepping stone where that leads to would be instructing in one. So usually for your first 1,000 hours of flight time, you'll be an instructor, typically in a Robinson helicopter. There are a couple different routes that you could maybe get into, some like crop dusting, some lower level utility stuff, maybe some tours, sub 1,000. But insurance companies really like to see you have that 1,000 hours of flight time before they put you in a turbine helicopter. And then that turbine helicopter is going to be that next stepping stone, whether it be tours in the Grand Canyon. Some of the Gulf of Mexico operators will hire you at 1,000 hours. And then, so 1,000 hours would be your next big stepping stone into a turbine helicopter. From there, the next number that everybody likes to look at is 500 hours of turbine time. So that'll put you around the 1,500 hour mark. And then that starts opening up some more utility jobs, some entry-level utility jobs to work your way into some construction utility jobs. And then 2,000 hours would be the next big stepping stone. So that 2,000 is kind of where all the rest of the jobs open up, EMS opens up. And then kind of at that point, hours isn't really necessarily what hinders you from finding the next job. It's more just connections and finding the right place and location that you want to be at.
Yeah. Yeah, the connection side, everybody I've talked to so far has said that networking is like the number one thing you got to do to be a professional pilot.
Yep.
Yeah, the hours, 200 hours to start instructing seems low. With fixed wing commercial, it's like 250 to even get there. So do you feel like that's a more accelerated pathway? I mean, is the flight time different? Are you going up for less time than like a fixed wing pilot would on each flight?
I don't know if the flight time and stuff would be different at all. I do have my private add-on, so I have a little bit of like private pilot fixed wing experience. Maneuvers are definitely different, obviously between the two aircraft. But I would say in general, the concept behind everything is the same. Just building up your maneuvers, meeting all your requirements as far as the cross country flights and everything to check all those boxes, and then getting up to competency with your maneuvers.
Mm-hmm. And the threshold to go to turbines, what's different or more difficult about flying a turbine versus a piston helicopter?
I wouldn't say insurance companies just don't like it because they're way more expensive. Like an engine in a 407 would be just as much as the entire aircraft of an R-22.
Right.
So that's kind of the biggest driving factor behind it. I would almost even say that like turbine aircraft are a little bit easier to fly because they're a little bit more reliable, and obviously you get a bunch more power and stuff out of it. So it kind of takes some of that risk and workload off of you as the pilot helping out.
Okay. Yeah, my buddy I was talking about that's in the Air Force, when he went through his training, so they start in DA-20s, I think, diamonds for the private.
Yep.
And then they went to the T6s, which, turbine powered single engine 2-seat
Yep.
trainers. And then he went to Rucker to do his helicopter training. And I was like, oh, do they start you in like a Schweitzer or an R-22 or what? He's like, no, it's a Huey. I'm like,
yeah.
For your first helicopter? He's like, yeah, we start in Hueys.
Yeah,
like,
that's crazy.
So it's the military obviously accelerates your training no matter what, but that was wild to me that they go straight to a Huey as the first rotor that they fly. I think they got rid of those for, I forget what they fly now. They switched it out for something different, but still huge turbine helicopter.
Yeah.
So to start to get into the medical side of things, you talked about that mindset of being in the front seat after having been in the back seat, been a medic, that sometimes there's some conflict, or some people can consider there to be some conflict of interest having that knowledge. What do you think was beneficial about having the medical knowledge ahead of time, and what do you think was a drawback?
I think maybe what was beneficial is I understood everything that was going on before the helicopter would get there, before we would get there, that, PD, fire department, ambulance, they were already there. They're already providing care. They're already doing what that patient needs. And more or less, yes, in some situations, our med crew would be able to provide a higher level of care or some different interventions that the ground crew couldn't necessarily do it. But for the most part, we're just, getting the patient to definitive care as quickly as possible. So I think that's what really helped out is, that I didn't really have that mindset of like, there's somebody out there laying in a field that isn't going to get any help until we touch skids down in the field. They're already getting help. They're already being treated, and we're just here to help expedite and help increase that treatment throughout the course of the actions.
Sure. So you guys aren't like rescue, you're transport, right?
Yeah. And actually in our GOM, search and rescue is really limited. The FAA really cracks down and makes sure that we aren't doing that kind of like search and rescue, landing at the top of a mountain to pick somebody up and take them down to the bottom, the kind of stuff. We're solely there to provide, a medical service.
Yeah. Is that a different kind of training and different agencies that are responsible for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, different kind of training, and then I believe too different kind of certification from the FAA as well.
Okay. And then what makes that medical flying more unique or demanding than your typical, you're doing flight tours or you're doing hog hunts or that kind of work?
Yeah. One of the things that we kind of joke around is EMS stands for earn money sleeping. So there is a lot of downtime that we get. But I think in complete like polar opposites of like a Gulf of Mexico job or a tour job where you're flying all day long, you know exactly what your mission is for the day. When you're getting to work and when you're being done with work. On an EMS shift, you could come in and get nothing, or you could fly a full 8 hours the entire day. And I think in a way it's that part of it is demanding of, you get to work, you're ready to go, but then there's nothing to do. So you kind of get in a lull, and you might, get your morning nap in, morning sleepiness in, and then a call drops, and now you got to be ready to go, and skids up in 6 minutes, or whatever the KPIs are for the base. So I think that the unpredictableness of the job is the most demanding part of it, and being able to keep up with everything that's going on.
Yeah. So you said 6 minutes, but what's that typical response time?
So I would say, yeah, like 6 minutes is a good example. We don't really have like a certain time limit that we're trying to hit. Obviously, if it's a scene call or something like that, we want to try to get up in the air as quick as we can. Inter-facility transfers, we have a little bit more time to kind of get ourselves ready and prepare ourselves, because we know it's going to be a little bit longer of a flight that we'll be out for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's quick. So when you show up, I would assume there's multiple crews that rotate schedules. Are you doing like pre-flight of the aircraft when you show up to the facility? Is it just always sitting ready to go?
Yeah, yeah. So we have so as pilots we work 12-hour shifts, and then obviously the 135 requirements. Can work up to 14 and only fly 8 hours in a 12-hour shift, and then we need that 10 hours of rest. The med crews, they aren't restricted by any of those kind of regulations, so they're working 24-hour shifts, sometimes 48s, depending on like sick calls or their schedule that needs to be filled out. Yeah, but then a typical day, we'll come in, and if there's no crazy weather going on or anything like that, the helicopter will usually be parked out on the ramp, plugged in so the battery stays nice and charged, and in a state of ready to start. So we'll come in, we'll do our pre-flight, and then leave the helicopter in that state so that when a call drops, all we have to do is walk out to it, jump into it, switch the battery on, and get going.
Risk tolerance seems like you guys accept a little more risk than a typical helicopter flight might. How do you go about determining, because there are lives at risk, right? But you don't want to risk the life of the crew on board the helicopter either. So how do you kind of balance the risk tolerances there?
Yeah, yeah. So I think as an EMS pilot, you have to make sure that your number one goal is that your crew and yourself make it back to the airport. Every single flight, and that's where your risk tolerance stops. You shouldn't be making any decisions or no or go decisions based off of the risk of the patient or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, if we don't make it there or we don't make it back, then it's just the next patient or that patient that we weren't able to help at all.
You hear a lot about medical helicopter mishaps. I think this year there have been several in just the last few months.
Yeah.
And I don't want to speculate on what happened with those incidents. I haven't read enough about them to know what the issues were. But do you think there is some of that almost get-there-itis or that feeling of wanting to go help a patient and accepting higher risks in that community versus others?
With some of the pilots that I've been around, I don't know if necessarily that would be accepting more risk or trying to think of the best way to put it, but maybe just not staying on top of your game. And, we're working 7 days in a row and you've got 7 night shifts, and maybe you didn't fly at all the first 2 nights, so you didn't get any rest between that third night. And now you're up at 3 a.m, 4 a.m, going and taking a flight and trying to do this. And so maybe just letting your guard down a little bit too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough schedule. I mean, to come in like that and, like you said, just have to be ready to go at the drop of a hat. That's not typical in any kind of professional flying. So I could see how that kind of complacency creep or just being unprepared could come into it.
Yeah.
Do you have any missions or flights that stick out in your mind that were particularly high stress or problematic?
I've had some, this current job that I have is the first time flying with NVGs. And so that definitely added, 2 or 3 months to, when I first started with this company, of just high stress and, a lot more things that I was having to do to make sure that I was prepared for the flight, adding just that one more equipment, piece of equipment for us. But I think if I look back at specifically my EMS career, because I was a paramedic before and had called a lot of helicopters to scenes to take patients of mine and stuff, I think going back to my very first EMS job in North Dakota, got off training. I was on my first shift just waiting for that pager to go off. And I think the pager went off and it was a scene call for a car wreck or something. And so that was my very first flight in EMS. And that one might look back and be the most memorable for me because I had spent so much time on the other side of it of calling helicopters, and then here I finally am being the one to fly into somebody's scene. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
When you go into a scene like that, you guys are obviously landing on kind of makeshift landing zones. It just is wherever the incident happens to be. How do you prepare to go into environments like that where you don't have a set designated area that's a typical spot that a helicopter would land?
Yeah. So that might be one thing that people don't always make the connection with helicopters. Like in flight training, we did that every single flight we went off airport and we're landing off airport. So it's a really good rhythm and routine that gets developed and hammered into you from an early age pilot. And we've got a bunch of acronyms. WAP is the acronym that we use. Winds, obstacles, path in, path out, and power check, and suitability of landing site. So those are all the things that we're looking at going in and out. Luckily, as an EMS provider, we typically have somebody on the ground there before us, a fire department, helping us out, giving us that extra set of eyes on the ground, looking for obstacles and wires. And then they can also spray down the dusty road and stuff before we get in there as well to help out.
Sure. And do you think there's anything that you've heard from the general public that's just like a broad misunderstanding of those kind of operations?
Yeah, maybe two things. So I know that EMS has gotten a bad rap for being expensive, patients being left with big bills. Legislation over the last 5 years, though, has changed a lot of that. And our patients on average are seeing $500 to $1,000 bills, all said and done, so a lot more manageable than those horror stories that we've heard of $60,000, $70,000. Mm-hmm. And then the other one too is maybe just a typical aviation gripe that the public has is, they're always calling about helicopters flying low and over houses and, being loud and noisy at 2 a.m. And it's just a minor inconvenience of 30 seconds of a helicopter flying over them at 2 a.m. But what they don't see is, whatever that patient is that we're going to get them, is a life-changing and once in a life, event that they're going through. So just, have a little bit of humility and stuff when something like that might be a little bit uncomfortable for you. So, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Do you have a situation that you've encountered or have you heard stories of helicopters going in and getting to the scene and just for whatever reason not being able to land or pick up that patient?
Yeah, it actually happens quite frequently. Patients can get sicker, where we'll be on scene and our med crew will be treating them. And if a patient becomes too sick, they can't go in the helicopter with us. It kind of seems a little counterintuitive, but there isn't a lot of room and a lot of space for them to work on the patient. So if it's going to be a pretty heavy workload for them, they might opt to just go by ground. But, with our crew being in the back of the ambulance, they can give the blood, do all that extra stuff that they would be able to get in the helicopter. And sometimes too, just landing zones from the ground, the fire department might think it's fine, and maybe it is fine, but there's just something from the air that we see that we just don't feel comfortable with, or something that we can't see. If we can't get a good eyes on a certain path in or path out of the landing scene, we might opt not to land there just because we can't figure out if there's any wires or whatnot. And that would be, like at night, especially is when the scene calls become really hard.
Yeah. With the NVGs, has that really improved your ability to get into locations at night?
Oh yeah, it definitely would get you into places that you'd never be able to go without NVGs. One of the EMS services that I did work for didn't have any NVGs. And we were pretty much restricted to like pre-designated areas that we would meet all of the ambulances in that area. If they needed something, and it was just because it was familiar with us, we knew the obstacles in the area, so it was a lot easier for us to get in at night.
Yeah. Like where I grew up, it's a mountain town in North Carolina, and there's a couple private airstrips nearby that were like a designated spot, but then it was all volunteer firefighters there, and some of the fire stations built helipads too, and that's like their designated pickup zone just because it's so difficult to get into the mountainous terrain.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you guys use dual tube NVGs or what?
Yes.
What's your set? Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able to. I know there's, I could say the brand or the but I can't remember the name of it. But it's
Yeah.
basically like the older style military ones have now
Okay.
sort of shifting over to the civilian side, and the military is now getting the newer and the like white sulfur ones, and so we're still seeing green. But yeah, so all
Okay.
the military surplus is starting to shift over onto the civilian side.
Yeah. And do you have that like paper tube, like the really narrow field of view, or does it
Yeah,
limit your depth perception too?
depth perception is a big one, especially right now. I'm based in Wyoming, so flying at night over the mountains, you'll like get up and you're like, I know this is a mountain right here, but it just looks flat like a piece of paper.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, I did when I went and visited my buddy at his graduation at Rucker, they let us test the NVGs. They like took us into a dark room and they gave us the dual tubes, but they were white phosphor ones.
Yep.
They like turned off the lights and they're like, "Okay, put them on." And I'm sitting there and I turned them on and I had to take them back off to see if they turned the lights back on in the room because
Yeah.
it was pitch black dark in the room and I could see everything
Yeah.
perfectly. But
Yeah.
yeah, the depth perception part, especially when flying, I think really gets underestimated how big of a deal that is. So you did offshore stuff in South Texas, right? Running people to like oil platforms. Can you describe that mission and what that flying was like?
Yeah. So that flying, you basically was just to get supplies and crews out to oil rigs, and then during the week while you were on hitch, out there at the oil rig, and then supporting whatever they needed. So you'd have 5 or 6 different pads that were anywhere from 100 miles to a half a mile away from the main platform that everybody was living on, and our job was basically just to get them around all their different platforms so they could do their daily checks, their weekly checks, and make sure that all the oil keeps flowing back towards the beach.
Are you flying single engine helicopters? What were you flying out
Yeah,
there?
yeah, it was primarily 407s. We did have some 206s at the time, but they're kind of phasing out. And then the company did have some bigger S76s that were mainly just transporting 10, 12 crew members at a time to the really deep platforms.
Yeah. Is there a pucker factor going 100 miles over the ocean with single engine?
Yeah, yeah. Like originally there was, but we did dunker training, so that was pretty fun. Got in pool with a fuselage and submerged, and had to exit the aircraft and stuff. But I think just kind of like everything else in aviation, you just got to kind of get used to what you're going towards. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And for somebody trying to build hours, I would assume your flights are much longer than you would find on like a tour guide or hog hunt. So is that a good time building job, you think, for people?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say that going out to the oil rigs and flying in the Gulf of Mexico is one of the number one like time building jobs that a lot of people do. There's lots of flying to be done, and yeah, you can fly anywhere from 40 to 50 hours. Every single hitch that you're in work.
Yeah. And I forgot to ask with the medical flying, but what type of helicopter are you flying for that?
407 too.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So very familiar with that platform. I know.
Yeah.
When you were doing the utility work at the company we were at together, same airframe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know I've been flying the 407 for a couple years now. I remember there was a time when I was in flight training that I was like, oh man, the 407, that'd be so much fun to fly someday. Now here I am going 3-4 years in a row now with only that aircraft. So
cool. Let's get into utility operations. This is the area that I'm probably most familiar with. As we mentioned at our last company, that was a lot of the work that we did was utility inspections with helicopters. Can you talk about that relationship between power utilities and helicopters?
Yeah. So the utility companies required by law have to inspect their power lines every so often, depending on the size of the lines. And so a really good way for them to do that is to throw a lineman into a helicopter, and then helicopters have the ability to fly basically at any altitude, so at power line height along it and pretty slow, so that inspector can get a good view of those poles. And when technology has been advancing over the last couple of years, and there's been introducing more sensors that you can attach to the helicopter to try to get these inspections done. And it just seems that the helicopters have been a pretty good platform to be able to manage all the different types of avenues that you can inspect these lines with.
Mm-hmm. And what makes a helicopter uniquely suited to that versus a fixed wing like a Cessna 182 or something?
Yeah. So initially in the utility inspecting that we were doing, we had some flight profiles that were pretty low to the ground, so like sub 300 feet AGL, and then some air speeds that were pretty low too, like 45 knots, 35 knots. So yeah, there's not very many airplanes out there that be able to safely fly in that profile for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, you don't really want to do that in a Cub for
Yeah.
multiple hours at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add my piece too. For a long time, other than fixed wing, there's no other platform that was able to do those inspections. When I started coming into that industry in that picture, we started using drones for a lot of it. But even then, you're only looking at one structure at a time, where a helicopter can cover hundreds of miles in a day, which we just couldn't do with the drones. So the value of helicopters for utility inspections, we talked about, they cover a ton of distance. They're also super versatile in terms of what the utility can do with it. I worked with a company in the southern U.S. that use their helicopter for inspection and VIP transport. So they'd move a lot of their executives around on the same helicopter.
Yeah.
But you're also using it in a way that maybe they're not explicitly designed to do. You said, you're low to the ground, you're pretty slow. What are the hazards of flying in that type of environment?
Yeah. So the height velocity diagram is one of the limitations. Well, I guess not technically a limitation in the flight manuals, but something that every flight manual has, and it kind of shows the area that a helicopter could successfully, an average pilot could successfully auto rotate it to the ground. And usually that 200 feet and sub 50 knots. If you're below either of those numbers, you're outside of the height velocity diagram. So there's a little bit more risk of being in a place where we don't have a bunch of that energy built up that we could be able to use to get ourselves back to the ground. And then also too, just the lower we are to the ground, the less time to troubleshoot things, the quicker the ground is there that we're on top of. And then also the obstacles and birds and other aircraft and stuff that we'd have to deal with that close to the ground.
Mm-hmm. And for people unfamiliar, can you describe auto rotation? Because I think a lot of people think if you're in a helicopter and the engine quits, you just fall like a rock to the ground.
Yeah.
And that's not really the case, right?
Yeah. Okay. So normal operations, obviously we have our engine driving our blades, keeping us in the air. And then if our engine fails, we'll start falling down towards the ground, and that air movement up through the rotor disc as we fall towards the earth will keep those blades spinning. And then when we get down closer to the ground, we use our airspeed to kind of do a flare and give ourselves a big slowdown and a stop. And if everything goes right, we should be at a hover with our blades freely rotating, 10, 15 feet off the ground. And then we can just use the inertia of those blades rotating to cushion our landing and get ourselves on the
ground. Okay. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say that it's almost safer to have an engine failure in a helicopter, depending on your profile, than it is in a fixed wing, because you can basically stop in a 10-foot circle if the conditions are right.
Yeah, I would agree to that. You can definitely, if you're got a good 1,000 feet and some good open ground below you, you'd have a pretty good chance on being able to get that thing down and in the exact spot that you want it in.
Cool. You did some training, and I want to dive deeper. For somebody that wants to go into helicopters as a profession, they want to fly. What did you see as an instructor that separates a good pilot from a great pilot?
Yeah. So I think learning would be just your willingness to get into the books and to read and do the studying. Everybody wants to go get into the helicopter and go fly, but you almost have to spend twice to three times as much time in the books reading and learning about everything than you do in the helicopter. So anybody looking to go through flight school, that would be what I would suggest there, is to focus a lot on that. And then as far as like being a pilot, I think one of the biggest things is just keep your humility bigger than your boldness, and always just be cautious in everything that you're doing.
When it comes to proficiency, there's a lot of rules around what you have to do to be legal to fly, how current you have to be in doing certain maneuvers. I don't know what it is for helicopters on the fixed wing side. It's like, your 3 takeoffs and landings in the preceding 90 days, that kind of stuff. But what I've heard from a lot of helicopter guys is just being legal doesn't mean that you're proficient. So what would you say is that balance between being legal and being proficient to the point where you're a safe helicopter pilot?
Yeah, yeah, and that's one thing to remember. Like you were talking, the 3 takeoffs and landings, that's all the same for helicopters, but that's just the bare minimums for like a private pilot to go jump in his own helicopter and fly from his house to the airport. We're not talking about pilots on their 7th day of hitch getting down to 100 feet off of a power line and following that all day long at a 1,000-foot overcast. There definitely is a level of proficiency that you need to maintain, keeping your nose in the books. Don't go 2 or 3 years before the last time you went over any aerodynamics, and yeah, just really making sure that you're keeping yourself comfortable and competent in that aircraft, because they'll get away from you quicker than you're ready for. So
yeah. When you were going through training, what was like the most difficult skill for you to pick up?
Yeah, the most difficult skill, I think, would probably be the regulations, because it's easy enough to read a regulation and then regurgitate that to your instructor and your DPE and pass a check ride with it. But really understanding like the whys behind that regulation, or reading into legal interpretations to like truly understand the meaning and the intent behind the regulation, definitely takes a lot of time and kind of a brain shift from starting to understand legal jargon versus just far aim type information.
Was there any physical skills as far as flying the actual aircraft that were difficult? Because like I don't have a ton of time. I think I have like an hour in an EC-120 or something,
Yeah,
and it was basically like we got up in cruise, and the guy's like, okay, take the controls. But then he said, follow me when we go into the hover, and it was crazy to me because in cruise it felt pretty much like an airplane. Like controls are tight, you don't have to do a lot of movement. But when we went into a hover, it was like everything just let loose, and the stick could go all over the place. The pedals were all over the place. So what did you have anything that was like physically challenging when you were learning to fly?
Yeah, I think trying to get that whole coordination there, and one of the hard things is like if you give an input on one flight control, whether it be the pedals, collective, or cyclic, it affects all of the other flight controls. So you have to do like a counter input on all of those. And maybe that's probably one of the hardest things to learn is, like I could give you just the pedals and I'll do the collective and cyclic, and you just worry about swinging the nose back and forth. But then now you do the pedals, you swing the nose back and forth, and you have to do a collective input to keep us at the same height. And then you add one more layer on it. Now you got to do cyclic input to keep us from drifting because you're doing more pedal inputs. And so, yeah, just building on top of each other, all 3 of those flight controls together.
Yeah. Was there a day where it just kind of clicked for you? It was like, that's how I felt when I first learned to land in a fixed wing, is like they were all terrible. And then one day it was just like, oh, I get it now.
Yep. Yep. And I think almost every pilot has the same type story. Is you get, 10 to 15 hours in your flight training is usually when that click happens. And as an instructor, you kind of know when they're ready to do that. And so you have to try to distract them somehow, be asking them a bunch of questions or talking about the weekend, asking them how their weekend is. And then you slowly let off the controls and they're hovering all by themselves, and you get, 2 or 3 more minutes in the conversation. And then you're like, hey, you've been hovering for the last 3 minutes all by yourself. I haven't touched anything, so.
Yeah. And then they overthink it and screw it up.
Yeah.
Did you have any big influences or mentors in your journey?
I saw that pre-question there from you, and I was like, man, I don't know if I really had too many like in aviation influences. But I will say that, like my family and my wife has been behind me 100% from the beginning of all of this. And if anything, they've been really pushing and helped me along in my aviation career. So,
yeah, that's huge. Just the at-home support, be it friends or family, is big for, I think, anybody going through it, no matter what path they choose. So that's great to hear. And then what to you defines a professional helicopter pilot beyond, just stick and rudder skills? What makes somebody a professional?
Yeah. So, like you said, beyond stick and rudder skills, there's so much more to being a pilot than just getting in the aircraft and flying it. Right now in the EMS world, you have two crew members that are basically living at the base for 24, 48 hours. So you have to kind of manage the relationship between yourself and them, and they're putting a lot of trust in you and what you're doing, flying and making weather decisions. And same thing with them. I'm putting a lot of trust in them when they're helping me clear the aircraft and being my second set of eyes when I go up and fly. Also, too, when you're like a tour pilot or working in the utility world, you might have customers on the aircraft with you. So they don't care how well you fly. It can be the bumpiest, roughest ride ever, but if you have a bad attitude with them, they're going to remember that. Or if you have a good attitude with them and have some water bottles sitting in the back for them waiting and stuff, like those are the things that they're going to remember. They won't remember the rough flight or the turbulence and everything like that. So I think it's 90% of your attitude is or 90% of being a pilot is your attitude and how you move forward with things. And obviously, if you've got your licenses, you can fly the helicopter, so you've got the stick and rudder skills. So
yeah. What has aviation taught you about risk management, responsibility?
Probably just to slow down. A lot of things not in aviation, maybe more risky things can be done quickly and you might be able to get away with it. But in aviation, you definitely just have to slow down, really calculate your risk, think through things, take that extra 30 seconds. That's not going to make or break anything. And really understand your situation around you and keeping that situational awareness.
Yeah. There's that old quote that's like, when your engine quits, wind your watch, or the first thing you should do is wind your watch.
Yeah.
Just take the time to
Yeah.
assess. That's a good one. And then what's been the most rewarding part of this journey for you so far?
I think probably just like fulfilling my career goals. As always from the beginning, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot, and I took a couple little side paths trying to get here. So it's been nice to finally be here at the end goal. Like being in EMS is one of the things that I thought I wanted to do for the rest of my career. So here I am. Here I'm doing it, and it's pretty fun to look back and be able to see all the different steps and flight hours I was at and levels and what got me here.
Yeah. And I love the side path part too, because that was a big part of what I wanted to bring forward with this, is like, you don't have to do the path straight and narrow perfectly from the day you decide you want to be a professional pilot until the end. Like, everybody takes little detours along the way. And so it's great having people like you on that did kind of go a different route for a little while and found their way back to it. So I appreciate that part of it.
Yeah.
Career wise, you said you wanted to be a helicopter pilot from the beginning. If somebody's coming into aviation, I think it's hard to overlook just the quality of life and pay aspects that you would get as like an airline pilot.
Yeah.
Especially since 2020, it's like, even in your first couple of years in the industry, you're making really good money, and the retirement benefits are huge. Once you're there 20 years, you're making pretty much as much money as you could make doing anything else, lawyer, doctor, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I would imagine helicopter pilot pay is not comparable to airline pilot pay.
Yeah.
So do you think that somebody that comes into it just has to really want to be a helicopter pilot, or are there other aspects of that job that could be enticing to somebody?
I think one of the big things that a lot of pilots talk about is the schedule. Typically, utility world works like a 14 and 14 or a 12 and 12 type schedule. So you're only working half the year. The only downside to that is utility jobs, you're traveling those full 12 days off. And then EMS pilots, we typically work 7 and 7. So same thing, you're only working half the year. So that's nice, especially if you can live where your base is at and you can sleep in your own bed every night. You get every other week off. And then you are having to work night shifts with EMS, but we're not the only industry to work nights, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I mean, there's airline pilots doing red eyes too. So
yeah.
And then over the last probably decade, have you seen big changes in the industry? What's been like the biggest advancement you've seen?
Yeah, there's definitely been a a really big push for safety in the last 10, 20 years, especially in the EMS side of it. I think they've kind of realized and understood that we can't be per se the heroes in the sky and flying into the bad weather to go save the person out in the field. So big advancements there, and then right now we're starting to see a lot of technology advancements too. A lot of our 407s are being replaced with GXs and GXIs. So we're getting the G1000s in it with the full autopilots and stuff too to help take off some of that workload. So I think the technology advancements too in the last 5-10 years have really played a big deal in safety as well.
And that was probably the most surprising part to me on the utility side when we started working in that, is just how antiquated a lot of the helicopter operators were, whether it be equipment, technology, their operating manuals. It is a little bit Wild West compared to a lot of other industries, I think. So it's good to hear that that's improving.
Yeah.
Because I think the rest of aviation, I'm not saying helicopters don't take it seriously, but the rest of aviation has really hammered that home over the last, probably 20 years, where it seems like helicopters are starting to catch up now, which is good. And then final thing, actually, one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, and you might not be able to speak to this as much, but I did have an interview with a guy that's working with Joby Aviation that's doing the electric VTOL, like electric air taxi stuff. And some interesting takes that he had on that. They actually just acquired Blade. So for people that don't know, they do helicopter transfers, maybe some tour stuff, but like JFK to Manhattan, they have you can take the helicopter back and forth. They have some stuff in Vegas now too. But do you see that advancement in technology, the electric VTOL or just electric aircraft in general? Do you think there's an area for them to come into traditional helicopter operations and replace some of those?
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely have, I would say very little knowledge to maybe none on the electric side of it. But I think if you just look at the electric vehicle side of it and how that industry has played out, I think we'll see some similar parallels to the aviation side of it as well. And yeah, it's similar to that question I always get asked too. Like, do you think like autonomous helicopters are ever going to take over and you're going to worry about losing your job? And like, well, when you look at the vehicle side of it, it's taken a lot, and electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles have been around for a long time, and they're not driving around yet. I think aviation and being in an aircraft is a whole different can of worms from just a vehicle on the ground. So I think it would definitely take a lot longer than vehicles. So
yeah, and especially in the environments that helicopters fly in. There's a big debate about going to single pilot cockpits and airlines and cargo fixed wing stuff, and a lot of pushback from the pilots unions on that, which is understandable. You have the redundancy of the second pilot. Helicopter operations, you're almost always single pilot.
Yeah.
Very few do 2-person cockpits. And to automate that, you lose some of that redundancy. But I do appreciate some of his points that he made on the electric VTOL side. You have redundancies in motors. Most of them have 6-8 propellers. They're much quieter. So like going over Manhattan, there was a big push for reducing the noise from helicopter transfers and that kind of stuff. And then the battery drain part was interesting. He was talking about, when you run out of fuel in a traditional internal combustion engine, you're out of fuel. You might sputter for a second, but then it's gone. But when you run down a battery, there's like this slow decline in power. So you kind of have a little bit of warning to that.
Yeah.
So I think there's some areas where it could be interesting, but I just wanted to get your opinion from it since you've flown helicopters for so long, if you saw anything there.
Yeah. And maybe it's just a little bit of incompetency or just not even paying attention to it. But as a helicopter pilot flying every single day in the real world, nobody's talking about batteries or autonomous helicopters coming and taking over our jobs yet. So it's not quite on our radar yet.
Yeah, I think it's a long way down the road, if at all.
Yeah.
Cool. And then any advice you would have for pilots coming in, either they want to swap careers, maybe they were EMS like you and they think it might be cool to be in the front seat, or anybody that just wants to make a career change and go down that professional aviator path?
Yeah, just make sure you have a good solid plan. Work with a flight school that has a good reputation. That was my flight school out in Idaho, Silverhawk. Um, that had a good reputation, maintenance reputation, and good reputation for getting people through flight school. And just be ready for the grind, because your first couple of years as a helicopter pilot, you're not making a lot of money and you're still flying a whole bunch. And there's the light at the end of the tunnel that you'll work towards. But yeah, just keep your nose to the grindstone and keep digging at it.
Cool. How would you go about picking a flight school? I'm not as familiar with the helicopter side.
Yeah, so I just found a couple flight schools around the area, like talked to some people that had gone through some schools, got some recommendations for them, and then talked to the schools and did a couple of site visits. And you can tell a lot about a school, and I mean, just general operators, just by going and looking at their hangar and seeing how clean it is. And does everything have a place, or is everything just kind of put somewhere? So there's a lot that you can tell from how somebody treats their aircraft and their employees and their students by how their facilities look like.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to hear more about aviation careers just like this one, you can subscribe to the Aerpod on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify. If you enjoyed this episode and think you know somebody that wants to become a helicopter pilot, share it with them. I'll see you right back here on the Aerpod.